My friends, today, we find ourselves standing at a moment in history where the world is once again being reshaped. Not by the roar of armies or the weight of empires, but by the quiet force of trust, respect, and shared destiny. And in this shifting landscape, one truth is becoming undeniable: Africa is rising, India is awakening alongside it, and the bond between these two ancient lands is redefining how the global South stands on its own feet. You see, for far too long, conversations about progress have been dominated by the same familiar voices, the same powerful nations, the same assumptions that development must follow the path of the West. But today, a new story is being written, not with charity, not with condescension, but with cooperation, technology, and mutual respect. And the author of that story is India. Now, when we talk about India's growing presence in Africa, many in the world ask, what makes Africa trust India more than the West? And to answer that, we must understand something deeper than numbers or trade statistics. It's about shared experience. It's about shared struggle. It's about two continents that were once written off as poor, divided, and dependent. And yet, through resilience, through determination, through faith in human dignity, they are now defining their own futures. India does not approach Africa as a savior. It approaches as a partner. And that, my friends, makes all the difference. When an Indian engineer lands in Nairobi, when an Indian farmer exchanges ideas with one in Kenya or Ghana, there's no sense of superiority. There's recognition. Recognition of a familiar struggle against colonialism, of the same hunger to rise, to innovate, to educate, to claim what was once denied. Both know the price of exploitation. Both know what it means to be underestimated. And both know the strength that comes when you build rather than beg. For decades, global powers looked at Africa and saw resources. India looks at Africa and sees potential. The West often offered loans tied to conditions, but India offers technology tied to opportunity. The difference may sound small, but it changes everything. When a solar plant rises in Rwanda with Indian support, when a digital payment system in Nigeria runs on Indian code, it's not charity, it's partnership. And partnership breeds trust. This trust didn't appear overnight. It was earned through patience and respect. It was built on a foundation that goes back decades, to the days when India stood beside African nations in their fight for independence. When Nehru spoke of Afro-Asian solidarity, it wasn't just rhetoric, it was vision. And that vision continues to echo in the corridors of New Delhi and in the hearts of millions who believe that global progress must be shared, not imposed. Today, as we witness Africa's digital transformation, you'll find that Indian technology firms, startups, and entrepreneurs are everywhere, quietly building systems, connecting farmers to markets, bringing education to rural villages, and revolutionizing healthcare with affordable innovation. These are not flashy projects designed for headlines. They are long-term commitments designed for impact. And let's be clear, Africa notices. When African leaders look to India, they see a democracy that grew not by conquering others, but by lifting its own. They see a nation that stumbled, struggled, and succeeded through perseverance and pluralism. They see a partner who speaks the language of humility, not hegemony. That's why trust grows. Because trust cannot be bought, it must be earned, and India earns it every single day. There's something else too, something intangible yet powerful. India's soft power doesn't come from dominance, but from empathy. It doesn't come from military bases or hidden agendas. It comes from the way it understands others' pain because it has felt it itself. It comes from Bollywood films watched in Lagos, from yoga classes in Cape Town, from Indian doctors saving lives in Accra, from scholarships that bring African students to Chennai or Delhi. It's in the way Indian culture travels, not as a conqueror, but as a guest invited in. Now, some may say, but India still has its challenges: poverty, inequality, social divisions. And that's true. But perhaps that's exactly why it connects so deeply with Africa. Because it doesn't pretend to be perfect. It doesn't lecture others about democracy or governance while ignoring its own faults. It offers what it has learned through struggle, through failure, through reform. That humility resonates. It reminds African leaders and citizens alike that progress is not about perfection. It's about persistence. And yet, this relationship is not just sentimental. It's strategic. Look at the trade numbers. Look at the technology partnerships. Look at the defense agreements, the training programs, the pharmaceutical supply chains. India is not only Africa's friend, it's becoming Africa's indispensable ally. From renewable energy to space technology, from affordable medicine to digital identity systems, India is empowering African nations to leapfrog into the future without repeating the mistakes of the past. Meanwhile, the West watches this transformation with a mix of admiration and unease. Because for decades, Western powers have built their global influence on dependency. Aid programs that often served their own industries more than the recipients. But India's approach challenges that very model. It says to Africa, you don't need to be dependent to develop, you need to be empowered. That message doesn't just empower Africa, it redefines the global order. And make no mistake, the world notices when a billion-strong democracy extends its hand to 54 African nations, not to control them, but to collaborate. It notices when African students come back from India, not just with degrees, but with confidence. Confidence that they can build their own systems, their own industries, their own futures. It notices when Indian firms build railways, when Indian satellites launch African payloads, when Indian vaccines save African lives. You see, this is India's secret advantage. Not its GDP, not its military might, not even its technology. It's trust, and trust, once earned, is the hardest currency of all. Because trust cannot be printed or shipped, it must be built. And when you have trust, everything else follows. But to understand why this trust is so unique, we must remember what history taught both India and Africa. They learned that foreign powers may promise partnership, but often deliver profit. They learned that aid without agency is just dependency by another name. And so they learned to stand together. When India talks about a global South that speaks with one voice, it's not a slogan, it's a strategy, a belief that nations that share history can also share destiny. There's another dimension here, technology. Africa's digital boom is not an accident, it's a revolution, and guess who's been behind some of its most transformative shifts? Indian innovators, Indian engineers who built mobile payment systems that now move billions in transactions across Africa. Indian coders who help governments create digital IDs that cut corruption and empower citizens. Indian pharmaceutical companies that supply 60% of Africa's vaccines. These are not gestures, they are game changers. Even in the corridors of power, the tone has changed. You hear African ministers talk about India as a brother in progress. You hear presidents speak about Indian collaboration not as aid, but as opportunity. And that subtle shift from donor, recipient to partner, partner is perhaps the most revolutionary change of all. Now, let's talk about the contrast. When Western countries engage with Africa, too often they come with terms, expectations, strings. They come with lectures about governance, democracy, transparency, values that are important, yes, but often used as instruments of influence rather than as shared commitments. India's engagement feels different because it comes with no baggage of superiority. It says, let's build this together. And that simple phrase, let's build together, is rewriting the balance of power in the 21st century. But this is not just geopolitics, it's humanity. When a young African entrepreneur uses Indian software to build her business, she's not just using technology, she's embracing trust. When an African farmer increases yield using Indian irrigation systems, he's not just improving production, he's sharing in progress. And when governments collaborate on digital governance, education, and health, they're building a bridge over centuries of division. And friends, here's the truth: the rest of the world could learn something from this partnership, because what India and Africa are showing is that growth and morality need not be at odds. That development can be dignified. That progress can be shared. That the world doesn't need new masters, it needs new partners. But make no mistake, this journey is not without challenges. There will be skepticism. There will be attempts to divide. There will be whispers that India is just another power looking to expand influence. But actions speak louder than words. And India's actions, its consistent support, its willingness to listen, its respect for sovereignty, these actions are what sustain the trust. In the coming years, as Africa continues its rise, and as India cements its role as a global leader, the partnership between these two will become one of the defining forces of our time. Together, they will shape the new architecture of trade, technology, and climate cooperation. Together, they will show that power doesn't have to dominate, it can inspire. And as for the rest of the world, America, Europe, China, they will have a choice. They can either cling to the old patterns of control and competition, or they can learn from this model of collaboration and respect. Because the future will belong to those who build trust, not tension. Now, as we look ahead, think about what this means for young people in Mumbai and Mombasa, in Lagos and Lucknow. It means they don't have to look outward for approval or inward with doubt. They can look across to each other and see partners. It means that innovation will flow not just from Silicon Valley, but from Nairobi, from Bangalore, from Kigali, from Pune. It means that the next great idea may not come from Wall Street, but from an African startup running on Indian code. This is the quiet revolution unfolding before our eyes. A revolution without conquest, without bloodshed, without domination. A revolution driven by respect, by empathy, by the belief that we rise higher when we rise together. And so, when we ask, why does Africa trust India more than the West? The answer is not found in statistics or treaties. It's found in something deeper. The shared heartbeat of two civilizations that understand pain, progress, and possibility. It's found in the fact that India doesn't see Africa as a project. It sees it as a partner. It's found in the truth that when you respect another nation's dignity, you strengthen your own. That is India's secret advantage. And as the world changes, that advantage will only grow stronger. Because in an age where technology moves fast and loyalties shift faster, the one thing that endures, the one thing that still moves hearts and shapes nations, is trust. And trust, my friends, is India's greatest export. Leadership demands sacrifice before it deserves respect. That is the truth that echoes across centuries, through empires, revolutions, and democracies. Every leader who has stood the test of time, who has earned not just authority, but genuine reverence, has done so not by demanding obedience, but by giving something of themselves. Whether it was time, comfort, pride, or even safety, they gave before they received. Because the world does not follow titles, it follows trust. And trust, in its purest form, is born out of sacrifice. To lead is not simply to occupy a position. It is to carry a burden. It means standing between the people and their struggles, absorbing the blows, and still walking forward with dignity. The first instinct of a real leader is not to ask, "What can I gain?" but, "What can I give?" They understand that their decisions ripple far beyond their own lives. When they rise in the morning, they rise not for themselves, but for the hopes of millions who look to them for light in uncertain times. Leadership becomes hollow when it forgets the price it must pay. History has shown that when leaders seek only comfort, power erodes. When they choose sacrifice, power endures. A commander who eats before his soldiers, a minister who profits while the people suffer, a CEO who celebrates while his workers struggle. These figures may hold authority, but they do not hold respect. Respect is not granted by the system. It is earned by the soul. It is not decreed by law. It is written in how a person chooses to serve when nobody is watching. The path of sacrifice is not glamorous. It often means being misunderstood, even criticized. It means making hard decisions that might not be popular, but are right. It means accepting that the applause will fade, but the consequences of your choices will remain. Leadership in its truest form asks for endurance, patience, and a deep sense of duty. It demands the courage to walk into storms with the quiet conviction that the pain you bear today will shield others tomorrow. We have seen this truth reflected in every corner of the world. Think of the reformers who faced imprisonment for the sake of justice, the soldiers who marched into uncertainty for the sake of peace, the teachers who built futures from scarce resources, and the workers who led by example rather than command. Their sacrifices were not broadcast across headlines, yet their impact outlived those who merely shouted slogans of leadership. Because people remember not the promises leaders make, but the prices they pay. There is a profound difference between authority and leadership. Authority can be inherited, bought, or imposed. Leadership, on the other hand, is earned through choices that place collective good above personal gain. The measure of leadership is not how loudly someone speaks, but how deeply they care. The true test comes not in prosperity, but in crisis, when comfort vanishes and decisions must be made in the shadow of uncertainty. In those moments, the world looks to see who stands firm not because it is easy, but because it is right. When we think of leadership as sacrifice, it reshapes how we view success. Success in this light is not accumulation, it is contribution. It is the legacy of lifting others while carrying your own weight. The most respected leaders are not those who rise the fastest, but those who lift others as they climb. Their sacrifices create ladders for future generations to ascend higher. They may walk alone for a time, but the paths they clear make it possible for countless others to follow. In every age, we find examples of people who understood this balance. The entrepreneur who reinvests profits into the welfare of workers. The statesman who faces political backlash for a decision that protects the long-term good. The scientist who gives years of quiet labor without recognition, knowing discovery serves humanity more than ego. These individuals remind us that the essence of leadership is not comfort, it is commitment. Not command, it is compassion. Sacrifice is what separates vision from vanity. A vision that does not cost anything, that requires no struggle, no endurance, is merely an idea. But when a leader is willing to bear the cost, to lose sleep, to face resistance, to endure failure, that vision becomes real. The weight of responsibility transforms ideals into institutions and dreams into movements. And in those moments, leadership transcends personality. It becomes purpose. Respect, in the end, is not something that can be demanded. It must be drawn out from others through consistent integrity. People do not respect leaders because they are perfect. They respect them because they see honesty in their struggle, humility in their victories, and resilience in their defeats. They see someone who gives everything without asking for applause. They see someone who sacrifices pride to preserve principle. Every generation must rediscover this truth for itself. In times of crisis, societies do not look for those who promise everything. They look for those who are willing to lose something for the greater good. Whether it's a moment of political upheaval, an economic downturn, or a humanitarian disaster, people instinctively turn to those who are ready to bear the cost of doing what's right. Leadership, in that sense, is not about control, it is about courage. It is about being the first to act, the last to retreat, and the one who holds steady when the winds of fear sweep through the crowd. In our modern world, where visibility often replaces authenticity, it's easy to forget this. We see leaders celebrated for appearances, not endurance. We see headlines filled with ego, not empathy. But the truth of leadership has not changed. Real leadership is built on sacrifice. It is the silent, often unseen choice to serve others at one's own expense. The cameras may turn away, but the effects of such choices ripple for decades. When a leader sacrifices, something extraordinary happens. People begin to believe again. They believe in institutions, in justice, in fairness, in the idea that progress is possible. They see that leadership is not about the few at the top, but about the many who benefit from their courage. Sacrifice builds trust, and trust builds nations. It creates the invisible bond that unites diverse voices into one purpose. There's a reason why we honor those who serve, teach, and protect even when they receive little in return. Because deep down, humanity recognizes the nobility in selflessness. We are drawn to those who give without counting, who lead without boasting. Their example reminds us that power alone cannot move hearts, but sacrifice can. And when leadership becomes synonymous with sacrifice, societies grow stronger, fairer, and more humane. So when we say leadership demands sacrifice before it deserves respect, we are not just describing a rule of politics or governance. We are